We are together in Venice, and I would like to know what was your project. Are you a couple?
We're a couple in the sense of doing this installation together and having a series of late night conversations over whiskey together.
That's it. Apparently no sex, huh?
Apparently, to a gap, a safe Hollywood gap between two beds.
So what about coffee?
The coffee pot.
Yes.
Well, the series started 4 years ago. It was a COVID project during lockdown when I was stuck in the studio for many months. And it started as it became a series of films about life in the studio, but specifically the techniques and strategies that exist in the studio for making sense of the world. So each episode looks at a different thing. Who am I? A kind of portraiture. Where am I? A viewer's landscape. What is my fate? Look at theatre projects about the Sibyl and so on. So each of the 9 films concerns a kind of a project either I've made or have anticipated, and the ambiguities and the self-doubt that happens in the studio always.
But why coffee?
The ordinary.
The ordinary, the quotidian.
The everyday life.
The everyday life.
Yes, it's a way of eschewing the heaviness of some intellectuality.
It's also that there have been so many drawings of coffee pots over the years that in the end you've got to say all the things you've drawn become, whether you like it or not, a kind of self-portrait. And so the fact there've been 1 million rhinoceroses and 1 million coffee pots, that's part of who one is.
And there are some ladies who read inside the coffee.
There are people who read their fortunes in the grounds of the coffee.
Yes.
And there are moments particularly in the episode on the Sibyl, of looking at, there's a couple.
There's a couple.
Voila, a real couple in the same bed. This is your wife?
Yes.
I met her
Yes.
in South Africa. And so, but also coffee is black, and you like the monochromatic work.
I do like the monochromatic work. Temperamentally, that's what I've done for many decades. I like the history of old black and white cinema, although the film is in color, obviously. It's not a black and white film.
But you love Tiepolo. You
I
always
love
told me
Tiepolo.
you would have liked to be a colorist, but you
Yes.
couldn't.
No. It's like I would love to sing in tune, but I sing out of tune. I would love to have done colors, but I am out of tune with my colors when I use them.
You think you are not right with colors?
So I can, for example, with music, I can hear very clearly if someone is singing out of tune when I work with opera, but it doesn't mean that I can sing in tune. So I can say the way these colors are used are fantastic, or these are less great, but that doesn't mean that when I'm mixing the colors, I'm able to, it's the same, it's just not being, knowing it's out of tune, but not being able to correct it. Knowing the colors are wrong, but not being able to push them into their right space.
But also it means something symbolically, right?
It does, it does. So I'm interested in things that start out practically, but gain a symbolic meaning after they're finished. So the color was not about what is the meaning of not using color. It's not about being Spartan or being putting one's eyes on a diet. It's what I was temperamentally capable of working with, but when it's finished, obviously it has a meaning, it has a different association.
Very important, and in fact there were black and white photos of horrible things that had happened in South Africa that as a child you saw on your father's desk, and charcoal is burnt, it's burnt wood in a way. I mean, it's not petrified, how do you say?
Yes, not petrified.
But so there's something about life and death and the mine shafts that are all associated with the black charcoal.
And also, I mean, the fact of charcoal as an ancient, I mean, from the earliest cave paintings, from the first time people were making images, charcoal, burnt wood, burnt objects were part of the vocabulary of image making. So when thinks of oil paint, that has a history of 400 years, 500 years. Charcoal drawing is a history of 12,000 years.
Yes.
So it's a very different, so
Maybe
normally if you
40,000.
think to be, or 40,000.
40 maybe.
So one thinks of, when I was a student, to be an artist meant to paint with oil paints on canvas. And then it took a long time to understand, no, that's one moment in art making and the history of art making that goes back way beyond and in each direction.
And so, how would you describe the baby of your, with the fruit of your relation?
It's a long relation, actually. We met in Italy in the mid-1980s. 90s. 80s?
90s.
95, something like that.
Nearly 30 years ago.
Nearly 30 years. And then I was fascinated by the erasure question. You know, these drawings that were humble drawings because they were kept being wrong. You know, there was this celebration or acceptance of something not being finished. And that fascinated me. And it actually made me think of Arte Povera, which is my foundation, because it's a kind of poor cinema. And at that time there was Pixar and they were starting all this high-tech stuff. So I went to visit William in South Africa, and I think it was foundational in my thinking through the years.
So now, how do you call the baby?
The baby is, it's a kind of a reconstruction of a view of the studio with the films in it, so that as you watch the films, different elements keep coming into focus. You see a paper vase on a desk in the film, and oh, there's the desk. You see the camera that's been filming, oh, and you turn around, the camera is watching over your shoulder in the actual space. So it's a different way of saying, oh, this is just a way of looking at 9 films on a television screen. It has to do with that inside the space where it was made. Lots of the elements were made.
And what is the importance of this place?
Of this specific space?
There's a lot to say. It's very near the entrance to the Giardini of the Biennale.
So it's convenient. People will be attracted.
Convenient. It's very convenient. So we're a little bit like poaching.
And also it needed to be domestic.
That's it.
Because the idea of the series would be, as the series started from the idea of what's possible now with streaming, that you can watch episodes. You can either watch 9 episodes at a go, or you can watch one and then have your coffee and then
in
watch
a hotel
another.
room, in an Airbnb.
So to find a space that's not just a big white box, but also has domesticity, like these beds and the TV set we're watching the films on. And in the space downstairs, the physical space of the room downstairs is about the same size as my studio where the films were made. So it's about that. So it's not expanding from a studio into a giant exhibition space. It's trying to find a scale that is big enough for people to look commensurate.
Commensurate would be the word. And on top of it, one of the episodes, episode 8 in particular, Oh, to Believe in Another World, is referring to revolutionary practice or inspiration for artists, in particular in Russia after the revolution. And this collapse or vision of utopia, I find related to situationism. So this place has a connection also with the collection of situationist documents and artworks belonging to Wolfgang Scheppe, which is a very, very good collection from which we could include works that are in this domestic environment.
So you speak about a domestic space, but you also speak about a huge space, which is a virtual space, streaming space.
Yeah.
We have Mubi now.
So what do you say about this imaginary, but in fact...
I mean, the imaginary space, one of the things, as you know about the imaginary space, is that it means that the work can be seen in a wide range, not only the people who come to Venice or to a particular museum, but streamed in a different way. So there are wonderful things that have come through the possibilities of streaming of this digital space, but we're also kind of aware of the threat of the algorithm. We love the algorithm. We can't live without it. We look on our phones 20 times a day to see the weather, to anticipate what's happening. But we also understand the kind of the authoritarian element of an algorithm that takes all the information from many, many people and then uses that information against an individual to make a decision to see how they should.
And you criticize it?
I put that as a question into the air.
Another
It's
thing
not the
into the air.
Yeah,
It's a lot into the air.
it's a lot into the air, and it's a big question. But I think, as we know, there is no good solution. There are a series of different solutions, provisional, but all have problems around them.
But are you optimistic or pessimistic?
And both.
How do you manage?
Well, I think to be just an optimist, so take the South African situation, which is a very difficult situation. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm just completely pessimistic, as if everything bad is happening. But to do that, to maintain a pessimism, is to blind yourself to many fantastic things that are happening. And to say, oh, I'm an optimist, is to blind yourself to many terrible things that are happening. So the most accurate thing is to understand two futures that are unfolding at the same time and to try to maintain that openness to both. And that sense of space of doubt and uncertainty is a very important one. And that's something that the practice of the studio and looking at art does very well. That's always been its terrain. To have riddles which we can't quite solve, but we at the edge of solving. And that's, for me, the processes that are obvious in the studio that are not obvious outside the studio.
And so I know that you are very curious of the world. So we are in a very special period for the world. So if you look at the pessimist in a pessimist way and in an optimistic way, so what would be the pessimistic one and optimistic one?
Well, the pessimistic one is easy in that there's a kind of, to say, I mean, one has a sense of the growth of right-wing authoritarianism and sometimes proto-fascist governments, not just in Europe, but in Africa, in many, many places. And the optimistic one is that there's a huge strength of popular resistance to it, of people being quite aware of the dangers of information being spread on them. And that, I would say, is the optimism. I don't know, Carolyn.
Madame?
Well, the pessimism is, of course, the collapse of humanity. Because if you have a very good algorithm, it would extinguish the species that messes up the planet so much, you know, to solve the climate disasters and so forth. So the idea of a Novocene that was written, you know, a world where computers are just doing everything and extracting minerals but don't need oxygen, is the pessimistic view.
What about the optimistic?
The optimistic, c'est le détournement. That's why we're in a situationist environment. It's the psychogeographic possibility and the détournement. So, for example...
So how do you say détournement in English?
Détournement in English. I wonder if they ever translated the word.
They don't dare.
It means to use something in a different way.
Yes.
So when William uses video and then plays it in reverse and magic happens, it's a détournement of that. Humans have always had a way of using in a different way a technology, anything, a fire, a bomb, anything. So there's this incredible love of life that we have, and it allows us to constantly de-alienate ourselves and to use things in a different way. So I'm sure, you know, if we exchange phones, for example, for 2 or 3 days, you will have a lot of fun after, and I will too. They will suggest different things.
Bon, so now it's time for the nap.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
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 Pleasure.